Hi, I'm Father Jim Forson, and I'd like to share with you a few reflections on the Gospel of the 33rd Sunday in Ordinary Time. If somebody were to ask you, what is God like? How would you describe him? Well, I asked that same question of some of our kindergarten and first grade children in the school, and these were some of the answers they gave me. Molly said, God is like giving love, he gives food. And Joseph said, God is like a flower. And Christian said, he has a big heart that loves. KK said, he's the king, he's everything, he's forgiveful. I love that, don't you? Forgiveful. And Alexis said he believes in us. And Madison said he's everyone's father. And this is my favorite. Jeremy said he's like Nutella on bread without the crust. Great. And that kind of echoes, imagine, how we would describe God, what we would say, that he is loving, he is merciful, he is kind, forgiving, understanding. And yes, he is all of those things. But today in the gospel, Jesus gives a description of God that can be unsettling. It's the story of the master who is going off on a long journey, and he calls in his three servants and he gives each of them a talent. And just to understand better Middle East economy at that time, a talent was worth about 7,200 denarii, and a denarii was worth 1 day's labor. So one talent is worth 20 years of labor, a tremendous amount of money. And he gives to one 5 talents, another 3 talents, another 1 talent. He's giving away a tremendous amount of his wealth and entrusting those men to invest that and make more. Now, I don't know anybody who does that kind of thing. I think to myself, would I liquidate all my assets and give them to anybody, even if it were somebody I trusted? That's a big risk. I don't know if I would do something like that. And here this man is. And why? Is he kind of a dupe? No, not at all. And in the gospel, we hear exactly what kind of man he is. Because on his return, he calls in the servants to give an account. And the one who had 5 made 5 more, and the one who had 3 made 3 more. And he responded by saying, well done, good and faithful servant. But the one who only had 1, well, he said, Master, I knew that you were a demanding person, harvesting where you did not plant and gathering where you did not scatter. So out of fear, I went off and buried your talent in the ground. Here it is back. And his response was, you wicked, lazy servant. You knew that I would harvest where I did not plant and gather where I did not scatter. Take that talent away from him and give it to the one who has more, and throw this useless servant out into the dark. That sounds pretty harsh. And the point of Jesus is not that God is a harsh master at all. But the point is, he is a demanding one. He expects his servants to take the wealth, the talents that they have been given, and to invest that to create an abundance. That's his expectation of his servants and the expectation of us. He expects us to take a risk with what he has given to us. And what is that wealth, that talent that he has given to us? Well, the one thing we say about God is that God loves us. He loves all of us. And that his love has come to each and every one of us in one way or the other. His mercy, his forgiveness, his compassion, his understanding, all of that is with us. And he expects us to take that love and to invest it in this world to create an abundance of it. And is that a risk? Well, tell me, is it a risk to go to someone and say, I love you. Do you love me? Or will you marry me? It's a tremendous risk because they might not have that same feeling for you and they might not want to marry you. Yeah, that's a risk. Is it a risk to say to someone, I will marry you? I will marry you forever, for the rest of my life. That's a tremendous risk to take. Or to have children with someone. Is that a risk? Of course it is. In fact, it is such a risk of love that the temptation might be to say, I'm not going to get into any of that. I'm not going to have those kind of relationships, to have children, to have anything like that at all. I'm just gonna stay here. I'm just be here where it's nice and safe. Take no risks at all. That's the temptation. To love is to take a tremendous risk. Is it a risk if we were to look into our life and to realize that maybe somebody loved me more than I loved them back? And I'm realizing now that maybe they did a lot more of the heavy lifting than I did. And to go to that person and to say, I didn't give you nearly as much as you gave me, and I'm sorry about that. Is that a risk? You bet. Tremendous risk. Which leads to that second great talent, treasure that God has given to all of us, that of forgiveness. God has forgiven all of us over and over and over, never counting the sins against us, never counting how the cost of his forgiveness. Rather, he just continuously forgives us, and he expects us to do the same. He expects us to continuously forgive. And is that a risk, to go to someone and to say to them, I've hurt you and I'm sorry. Please forgive me? Yeah, that's a risk, because the person might throw it back in our face, saying to us, no, I'm not going to forgive you. You don't deserve it. That is a risk. Is it a risk when someone comes to us and says, please forgive me? I've hurt you. I'm sorry. Like the prodigal son, the story we have in the gospel, where he went to the father and the father forgave him. But you know, the interesting thing about that story is that there was no guarantee that that prodigal son wasn't going to go out and sin again. The father just gave the forgiveness away, which is how God expects us to forgive. There's no guarantee the person who seeks forgiveness won't sin again. No. But we're just called to risk it, to risk forgiving this person in hopes that if I forgive the way God forgives, somehow, some way, this world will be the better for it. God expects us to take that risk of love the same way he expected it of Jesus, who was one of the great risk takers of all time. Jesus risked it all. He preached love and forgiveness to people who in turn would throw rocks at him. He would heal people, many of whom never came back to say thank you. And he gathered his disciples to himself, trusting that somehow they would continue his message. And what was the response? One would betray him, one would deny him, and the rest would run away when crunch time came. Why in the world would he invest himself in them? Why in the world would he ever trust them? Was he a dupe? No, because he believed that if he gave to them, he invested in them, if he poured himself out into them as God had poured himself out into Jesus, that somehow, some way, this world would be the richer for it. And it was. So, what is God like? Well, God is a flower. He is forgiveful. He is brave. He is all those things. He is a piece of bread without crusts with Nutella. And he is a demanding God who expects a return on the wealth that he has given to us. He expects us to create an abundance. He expects us to risk it all